The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everybody, to tonight's public forecasting webinar. We're going to do a series on Saturn and Capricorn here over the next several days with Kim Marie, the director of the Evolutionary Astrology Network. Just a brief, wanted to get a brief tutorial on the process to enter and become a part of these forecasting webinars. Number one, we offer an enrollment on our website on the forecasting webinars page. And we also send out an event newsletter out of Constant Contact, our email client that we use a lot of. So those are two places you can get your enrollment. However, whenever you enroll, that does not get you registered with the webinar service. So you have the responsibility to look in your confirmation email from wherever you got your enrollment. And in that confirmation email will be at least one hyperlink to get registered for the GoToWebinar service that we use. So you're gonna have to get registered, because what that does is it allows you to join, like many of you are tonight. We're getting the board populated, and we like to see a lot of live people participate with us on these webinars because it is an interactive format. But many people, practicing astrologers particularly, just want to get all the research that Kim Marie has done for them on such a transit like Saturn and Capricorn, which will be effective for the next 3 years. Will be affecting all of us for the next 3 years. So register with the webinar service, and what that's going to help you to do is get on the live broadcast, of course. But regardless of your intent to join live, you'll also get the PDF of tonight's webinar with audio and video links and all the slides that you can print out. That is also distributed from the webinar service interface. So you must register with the webinar service after your enrollment with any of our forecasting webinars. So thank you for letting me get that in there. For those that will be looking at this for the next couple of years, we're going to have a lot coming up here. It's pretty busy, pretty active time for transits such as this. So thank you for letting me get that in. Any questions, just email MediaMonk@evolutionaryastrology.net. You can always call us at 605-348-5111. We appreciate your attendance tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to our presenter for the material, Kim Marie.
They can also just type in their questions on the Q&A part of the panel board, right?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So those of you that are new to this format, you have a GoToWebinar control panel, which is a small orange arrow that you'll see. Click on that orange arrow and it will expand to the full control panel. And there you'll see a lot of capability. You'll see the question and answer board that Kim is referring to. In other words, if you have a salient quick question that's relevant for the material, you want to have me present to Kim Marie, bring up during the session, we'll do that. If Kim Marie, in the course of these webinars over the December here with Saturn and Capricorn, Archetypes and Cycles and Saturn and Capricorn around the houses, if she wants to open it up for questions, you must be mic'd with, let's say, Apple earbuds or a USB headset in order to ask your question live. But the Q&A panel is the key thing. There's also a chat area. You can chat me up there if you'd like. A lot of other capabilities. So just look for that orange arrow on your computer screen as we start. So I'll turn it over to you, Kim.
All right, and mine didn't automatically record this time, so I did press my record button. So I don't know if you changed something or not, but
thank you. We're going. We're recording.
We're going, and we'll have 2 recordings. The biggest paranoia when you do one of these, especially close to a Mercury retrograde, and it's always the dance with our free Mercury retrograde webinars, is like, oh my gosh, the recording.
Well, you put a lot of work into them, so we want to make sure we have duplication of effort, or redundancy, I guess is what you call it. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for all the work on the slides.
2 recordings are better than none, right? Welcome to our Saturn in Capricorn series. This is going to be the first class tonight on the archetypes of Saturn in Capricorn. As you can see on your screen, Saturn's going to be in Capricorn all the way from December 19th, 2017 through December 16th, 2020. And it'll dip into Aquarius for 3 months in 2020, but spend about 2 3/4 years in Capricorn altogether. Here's our housekeeping slides here at EAN. You can study evolutionary astrology with us 3 different ways. You can listen to our free weekly audio podcasts. You can subscribe to our Astro Library for 1, 6, or 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. You can subscribe to each of those 3 sections or all of them at once. And of course, our evolutionary astrology course is also put into 3 different sections. And right now, through the month of December, you can save 25% by putting in the coupon code Capricorn. The 25% will be off the materials or materials and digital. The digital only doesn't go on sale because that's a lot less dollars out of your pocket, Capricorn, shall we say. But any of our 3 segments right now are on sale with the materials or materials and digital, and saving 25%. So here are the dates that Saturn is into Capricorn. It dips into Aquarius early March 2020, and then retrogrades back into Capricorn for the final 4 or 5 months of the year. More or less, though, we're going to be seeing Saturn in Capricorn for 3 years. Now, Saturn is going to be moving into its own sign of rulership, Capricorn. So we're not going to blend archetypes like we did with Saturn and Sagittarius or Saturn and Scorpio. In evolutionary astrology, the planet that rules a sign and rules a house, the planet, sign, house are one archetype. And Jeffrey Green always taught that if you learn the 12 archetypes of the zodiac, then you can understand all the planets, all 12 signs, and all 12 houses. And that's definitely been the situation over the years as I've studied it for myself as well. It takes a lot of the complication out when you can understand these archetypes in their generic fashion and then apply them to a house or apply them to a sign. So when Saturn is moving into Capricorn, it's actually starting a brand new cycle in the solar part of the zodiac. I guess you would say Saturn's in its own sign of rulership. So Saturn will be having a lot of death and new beginnings whenever it moves through Capricorn. So remember this, because as we get into Wednesday night's class with the cycles and we look at Jupiter and Saturn being balsamic to Pluto in Capricorn, there's a lot of old stuff that's just going to be falling apart and crumbling, and news will come over the next few years down the road. So remember, the Saturn transit through Capricorn is a bit of throwing off the old and the new coming in. First of all, a little bit of Saturn astronomy for you. 29.5 years around the sun, depending on a Saturn retrograde cycle. When you were born, you could see Saturn taking 28 to 29.5 years to go through your circle of your chart or around the zodiac. It gives Saturn an average of 2.5 years in a sign and a mean daily motion of 2 minutes a day. Saturn has one retrograde cycle for about 4.5 months, 140 days. And when Saturn slows down to go retrograde or turn direct, its stationary period is 5 days. In other words, it appears to stand still in the sky for 5 days. Saturn is like planet Earth and Jupiter in that it is wider around the middle, around its equator, than it is at its poles on the top and the bottom. Excuse my burp. Saturn is the second largest planet in our solar system after Jupiter. It is a gas giant like Jupiter, and it does not have much gravity on it because it is the least dense planet in our solar system, made up of mostly hydrogen and helium, 2 of the lightest elements in the universe. Saturn's rings are only 1/2 mile thick. There are 7 categories of rings, and they're made up of particles of ice, dust, rocks. Saturn's rings are held in place by its moons, the gravity from its moons. That gravity also causes the gaps between the rings. And Saturn has 53 official moons, 9 unofficial moons. Think about that for a moment. You know, with here on Earth, just looking at our one moon, and of course, I hope you all saw that beautiful full moon this last weekend. Imagine if you had 60 moons moving around planet Earth. Holy Toledos. Boy, we'd really get into some Capricorn have and have nots and, you know, building high rises on one moon and sending everybody else off to the other one. This is my favorite, one of the other ones. This is my favorite picture of Saturn. I think that this is a NASA photograph, and I think this is just a beautiful, beautiful picture, giving you some idea of what Saturn's rings are like. Mythology, I am nowhere near any expert in mythology. It's just never been one of my interests. But I do put up a few little details. Saturn was the Roman god of agriculture. That's why you see him with the scythe in the background of this picture that was used to cut the grain down. Saturn is the son of Uranus and the father of Jupiter. And Saturn overthrew his father, Uranus, to become king of the gods, and then he himself was overthrown by his son Jupiter. To me, that's a lot of that Capricorn 10th house. You know, you rise up, you fall down. Saturn was known as Kronos Cronus by the Greeks, and regardless of how you spell the word Kronos, in Greek it means time. Saturn was known as Father Time. And as we know with one of Saturn's archetypes, it is the archetype of space and time, or linear time. So as I said, when we look at Saturn transiting through Capricorn, we've got one archetype, which makes it a lot easier for interpretation, basically, because again, you're not blending archetypes. Capricorn and 10th house are the passive polarity, cardinal modality, and the earth element. Passive polarity means energy returning to the center. Cardinal means initiating the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And earth, of course, is always concerned with the physical environment, Capricorn being the 3rd and final earth element. And you can see where it can then be that accumulation of resources we'll talk about. The biggest thing about the Saturn Capricorn 10th house archetype, though, is that it is the structure of the individuated consciousness. It is the boundaries of what is known on a conscious level within the soul. And Saturn then also becomes the bridge to what we would call the unconsciousness, which is represented by the planetary archetypes Chiron, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and of course Eris too. Souls who were born with natal Saturn retrograde have the door to that unconsciousness thrown wide open, so to speak. Those born with Saturn retrograde have the potential to be more aware of the unconscious archetypes because Saturn's retrograde. And of course, many of us can have Saturn turn retrograde by major progression. And when that happens, it will have that same effect, throwing the door open to the unconsciousness, which will help throw off a lot of the conditioning factors that we run into. And of course, every other planetary archetype is filtered through Saturn. It is defined by Saturn. So that means a Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, they are all filtered through Saturn. They all have their planetary pair relationship with Saturn, all of them having a phasal relationship, maybe specific aspects. But the unconscious planets are also related to Saturn as well. And what has a tendency to happen here is that structure of consciousness via Saturn wants to suppress what's unconscious. It brings up insecurity. Saturn likes to have everything in order, to feel safe and secure in its outer world, and those unconscious planets have a tendency to disrupt things. So Saturn will always try to push that unconsciousness back down below the surface. Again, not as easy to do if you have Saturn retrograde in your natal chart or by progression. So here is how we look at this structure of individuated consciousness. We look at natal Saturn, where it is in your chart by house sign aspects. We look at the rulers of the sign and the house and where those rulers are in the natal chart with their own location, house sign aspects. We look for any planets in the 10th house by sign and aspect. What is the ruler of the sign on the 10th house cusp? Where is the ruler of that sign with all of its aspects? Where's Capricorn? What house cusp has the planet or has the sign Capricorn on it? Are there any planets in Capricorn? Are they making aspects? And then, of course, as I had said earlier, that sign on the 10th house cusp and its planetary ruler as well. So I thought what we'd do tonight is jump right into Donald Trump's chart to give you an example of this structure of consciousness. And I repeated these little indicators to help us as we're looking at that. Donald, I'm using the June 14th, 1946 chart from 10:54 a.m. in Queens, New York, with the 2955 degree Leo rising. Trump, of course, is the 12th house Pluto in Leo, but what we're going to focus on right here at the moment is his natal Saturn. He has Saturn direct at about 24 degrees Cancer in the 11th house. Venus is a new phase conjunction to Saturn. Jupiter is a waxing crescent square to Saturn. It's approaching first quarter square. And the moon is applying in a gibbous phase inconjunct to Saturn. Saturn in Cancer, ruler is the moon down here in the 4th house, Sag, conjunct the south node. Ruler of Saturn by house 11th is Uranus up here in the 10th house in Gemini, conjunct the north node and the sun. The two rulers of Saturn are within orb of being opposite each other. It's a full phase opposition, meaning it's past 180 degrees. How many of you are aware of hearing Donald Trump's loyalty demand of his employees? And remember, before James Comey was fired from the FBI, you know, Trump had demanded loyalty. And what did Comey say? I will give you, I'll be loyal to honesty or something to that effect. He wouldn't give him that blanket loyalty pledge. Saturn in Cancer is in the opposite sign of its rulership. And in many regards, it will bring the potential for objectivity when a planet's in that opposite sign of what it naturally rules. As we've had the observe and correlate with Donald Trump's chart, though, what we do see is for him, that Saturn in Cancer is almost an emotional infantilism. Doesn't matter how old this gentleman is, in 70 or early 70s, I think he is now. What is that? Yeah, he's got to be 71. And yet, if you look at Saturn in Cancer, how many times do you, if you can get yourself to watch him on TV, I can't. I can, a few minutes and I'm like, I'm done. But how many times do we see him acting so emotionally infantile. And I don't mean this in any judgmental way to all Saturn in Cancers. Healthy Saturn in Cancer is going to be, very emotionally empathetic. They're going to be able to touch into somebody else's emotions. Trump with this Venus new phase Saturn, he's got a structure of consciousness that I think 11th house being fixed air, I think he has a frozen emotional body in many ways. He doesn't have the maturity of an elder statesman. It's very infantile. And he almost forces everyone else that he has relationships with to meet him at his level. He is very simplified in many regards. For all his wealth, there's not a lot of savvy to his mental operations. Now, this is then going to start to bring in these rulers of Saturn by house and sign here. And of course, we all probably focus on this Gemini Sag opposition in his chart, this lunar eclipse that he was born under, and the emotional flightiness and feistiness that comes along, and the say whatever comes out of his mouth or whatever he tweets at 4 o'clock in the morning. If you've caught any of the more recent news cycles, he sent out a tweet to the effect that that Michael Flynn has his former national security director, I think, is under investigation by the current head of the FBI, Robert Mueller, and he has pleaded guilty to one offense. And what the political circles are saying is that Flynn has flipped to give testimony against Trump. But what was the point I was going? Oh, this tweet that he put out this weekend was, he had to fire Flynn because he lied to Mike Pence and the FBI. Well, that tweet saying he lied to the FBI means Trump obstructed justice by denying that happened. So you can't have it both ways. So what do? They call out Trump's personal lawyer, who is a pretty astute individual, and they're trying to pass the story off. All these lies coming in to the structure of consciousness and the unconscious soul that just doesn't even have a self-awareness, Leo, of any of this. And his lawyer's trying to pass off the lie that he got a hold of Trump's phone and he did the tweet. And it's becoming almost laughable and ridiculous. And I think as Saturn transits through Capricorn, nowhere are we going to see that classic fall from grace bigger than Donald Trump himself. Now, again, because we have the rulers by house and by sign, Uranus and Moon, in this Gemini Sag opposition, this whole truth versus lies, and I'm in charge and I'm the boss, 10th house, you're going to say what I do, and everybody else has to have this emotional, undying loyalty to him, no matter how you have to lie about it. You can see structure of consciousness through this. Now, sign on the 10th house cusp is Taurus. Its ruler Venus is over here, literally conjunct Saturn. This can be born into the wealth. And 11th and 5th, Aquarius and Leo, if you're not aware of this in your traditional astrology, can have a lot to do with Leo, 5th house royalty, and Aquarius, 11th house, the societal elites, the upper classes of society. So if we look at this Taurus on the midheaven and its ruler Venus being conjunct Uranus Cancer, 11th house, born into money right here. So he has a structure of consciousness that is just totally valuing the dollar signs, the gold-plated this, the gold-plated that, you know, the biggest airplane, the, you know, biggest of anything. If you've ever seen pictures of some of his personal living space in Trump Tower in New York, it's, you know, it's just over the top with its gold. That's going to be this Leo ascendant signature coming in. But again, it can also be the double earth that we see right here, and it can be this familial wealth that he was born into as well. And the, you know, when your structure of consciousness is always had wealth, you don't know what it's like to relate to someone who doesn't have it. Trump only took up the populist language because he saw that as the means to an end. It was what he could come along and exploit, Gemini Sag, and get people to emotionally connect with him and believe him. If you look at anybody who is a Trump supporter, it's almost like they can't look at facts. They get into denial around the facts. They put their blind faith, you know, it's that public demand for loyalty to him that they willingly take. And so it's been real interesting to watch this Pied Piper with this elitist structure of consciousness that is quite emotionally immature and will say anything and everything to be in charge, to be the biggest, to be the best, to have the flashiest, you know, caught in lie after lie after lie with the whatever subject you want to pick up. Now, we even have Mercury brought into this by ruler of the planets in the 10th house. We have Jupiter brought into this by ruler of planets in 4th house and by the Sag, sorry, and by ruler of the moon in Sag in regards to this. So you can see that there's quite a bit that comes into Donald's chart to create that structure of consciousness. So this is just, you know, again, short example. I'm not going to go into more and more details. You probably are sparking on your own things, looking at the chart and these things that you look for that all create what we again call this structure of consciousness. So you may find yourself reviewing this in your own chart, because as Saturn transits through Capricorn, it's going to be the evolution of our structure of consciousness. Where is it going to break down? Where is it going to need to be rebirth and evolved? Now, Saturn in Capricorn is the principle of all the conditioning factors in our life: family, society, religious, and resources, meaning money. I have, I call this the environmental conditionings. All of us get conditioned by whatever wounds or distortions we're born into and raised with our family. You know, we get conditioned being an American versus being French or Australian. We get conditioned by our resources or lack thereof. All of these conditioning factors come up for evolution as Saturn transits in Capricorn. It is also judgments relative to standards of right, wrong conditionings via a right, wrong conduct via those environmental conditionings. So if you are raised in an extremely religious environment, you're going to consider being gay to be a standard of wrong conduct. It may or may not be natural law. So these standards of right, wrong conduct always are going to come via the consensus arena of any given society, versus what we're going to call natural spiritual principles or natural law. Now, Saturn coming off of the transit through the sign of Sagittarius has given all of us the last 2.5, 3 years to really deepen our understanding of what is truth and what is human-made conditioning. Now, relative to observe, correlate in evolutionary astrology, 7 out of 10 people are consensus, cowbells around their neck. You can just reflect here on Saturn and Sagittarius. For instance, the gentleman from Alabama who has sexual allegations with minor women, and people just choosing to blindly follow him and ignore the truth, Saturn in Sag. Now, whenever Saturn goes retrograde, of course, this is always a time period to throw off these standards of what is right or wrong conduct and work to arrive at what is natural for you as an individual. Those of us who disobey some of these consensus standards can be made to feel a lot of conditioned guilt. This can be one of the things that you can really see the consensus coming out with over the next few years, because, for instance, here in the United States, as we become more multi-ethnic, as we have looked at Pluto and Capricorn's long transit, bringing all of the LBGT out of the closet, so to speak. Other aspects have been a part of it as well. The consensus is going to make us feel guilty about that. For those of you, I think it was my Mercury retrograde class, I had a girlfriend that we get together every so often and have a meal and socialize, and her young nephew, early 20s, born into an extremely religious family, got the courage to tell his parents he was gay, and it created so much disruption in the family, and his parents made him feel so guilty that he told him he disowned his gayness. Actually, he was lying about it, according to what he said to my friend. So there's that conditioned guilt that we're all made to feel. So we can look at all the different areas in which consensus society is going to try to make us feel guilty over the next 3 years. And how are we going to throw off that guilt? How are we going to throw off those consensus standards of what's considered wrong and evolve it towards more natural law? Stay tuned. We'll see how things turn out to be written. I would expect conservatives to try and overturn the Supreme Court decision in the U.S. that legalized gay marriage. They're going to be trying to bring that up through the courts. One of the things that Trump has overly done, if you're not aware of this, is why so many vacancies exist in a lot of the administration. He is bending over backwards to put conservative young judges into federal judgeships that are for life. Let's see if that ends up being changed as well as we go through Saturn in Capricorn. So Saturn in general represents consensus society. Those of you who are aware of 7 out of 10 consensus, 2 out of 10 individuating, 1 out of 10 spirituating, more or less observing any country, any race. Saturn is that 7 out of 10 that is consensus. And Saturn in Capricorn will see this group of people trying their darndest to defend the past, to defend the dinosaur position on anything. In general, this is going to represent evolving whatever are the rules, norms, taboos, laws, etc. We need them. We have to have traffic laws so we minimize, car accidents. Any group has to have the agreement of how they're going to function together. You notice that you will have your own family of origin, norms, and taboos. We have this in any society. We have this in a country. This will be all up in the air with Saturn. However, 7 out of 10 are going to try and take it back to yesterday. Saturn in Capricorn is the maturation process relative to all of these environmental conditionings, meaning that as we grow up, we eventually have to look at self-responsibility or accepting responsibility for our own life, our actions, our efforts, and whatever the results of our efforts turn out to be. We also then have to start looking at self-determination, the discipline to take charge of our life within society. This includes career and the job, but it is broader than that. It is the discipline to take charge of every area of our life and how we are going to function within a society. How do we be in society but not of society? These are two real strong words to look at right here. And whenever any planet is transiting over the 10th house cusp, these are some strong words to use with the person who is experiencing the 10th house transit. I'm always telling him the psychology under career is self-determination. And that's what it is that you really need to address if you want to advance career or you want to evolve and do something different. So all of us will be taking a look at, are we being responsible in our world? Are we finding that self-determination and discipline to change whatever we are wanting to change? This eventually, what it really allows us to do is to establish an individual authority in any society. So I function within this society, but I am not of this society. People have a tendency to think because, Leroy was born and raised in Western South Dakota, although he's spent a fair amount of time living in big cities throughout his 20s and 30s. I was raised in Eastern and then Western South Dakota. It's a conservative state. The Black Hills is this beautiful area with a lot of conservatism to it. People here vote for Trump 7 out of 10. Tell you anything? We will sometimes get comments that people can't imagine how we live here. But we love the beauty of it. It is our conditioning factors. But we are about as on the extremes of liberal or social democratic as you can get. And we both have that wherewithal, that self-responsibility, self-determination, that we can live in this group of people without allowing them to control us. In other words, we have worked to establish our own individual authority regardless of where we live, regardless of what our work is, regardless of how our family members vote, go at the whole political situation. And of course, with Saturn in Capricorn, it all accumulates into positions of authority, social positions, being the leader, being the one who has the power and the control. All of this is going to be turned topsy-turvy through Saturn's transit into Capricorn. And as we'll look Wednesday, the Jupiter transit, their conjunctions, eclipses are going to happen during that time period. We're going to have the nodes in Cancer, Capricorn during 2019 and 20, and so we'll look at more of that in a little detail again in a couple of nights. But the whole thing is when someone achieves any sense of Capricornian or 10th house power and control, they don't easily release it. They want to keep the power. They want to keep the control. There are those who are saying that the Republican Party realizes that ultimately, with the changing demographics in our country, they're going to be the minority. So they are trying to get as much out of their position of power as possible this year and next year leading up to the midterm elections. And they're, signing their own death warrant or suicide, but that's not stopping them, because as they make these changes, permanent tax cut to the wealthy and corporations is not a done deal yet. We'll see what, happens over this next few weeks. While tax cuts to the lower and middle class are only temporary, it's still going to be a tough thing to perhaps change those. And, as I've been thinking of Saturn's transit in Capricorn and looking at this on the larger level, I've just decided I'm not going to let myself get into that depression and futility that can sometimes come from Capricorn on its involution cycle. I'm just like, if we can swing it one way, we can swing it another. And I just energize that out there into the ethers anytime I start thinking on this subject. So, did I hear Leroy? Sorry. And so what we're going to see through Saturn in Capricorn here is the consensus in general, not just political leadership, but corporate leadership and, Hollywood leadership, wherever you see this, those in power, the haves versus the have-nots with Capricorn, they are not going to let this go. And they're going to try and control what is going to be the natural evolutionary process, not only in the US, but worldwide, in more and more people through. Even though this is slow to see, that transit of Pluto through Sagittarius before it went into Capricorn. And now Saturn's transit through 3 years in Sagittarius. There was an evolution of people recognizing the difference between religion and spirituality, of more and more people recognizing how religion tries to control and condition versus people recognizing that natural one-on-one relationship with source or a higher power. I think in a year when Jupiter transits through Sag, we'll see some quickenings of this. And so while Saturn in Capricorn is going to be trying to, condense and condition so much, it will also initiate a lot of changes in all the areas that you see. Again, the laws, the norms, the taboos, how we function in any society. And even if Saturn, Jupiter, and Pluto in Capricorn have some success in really turning back social progress, we will have all of them going into Aquarius after Capricorn. So wide pendulum swings. And I think as much of this stuff breaking down as anything. I mean, who's going to have the fall from grace bigger than anyone other than Donald Trump? We all see it. Let's see if and when it comes to pass. It's not a given. Stay tuned. I think the guy's losing it. So Saturn in Capricorn is also going to be about the accumulation of resources and the management of the resources. And again, resources for me is a broader word than just money. You know, it includes money, but it also includes land and buildings and, you know, public utilities that they want to be privatized. And we'll see all of this up in the air. I mean, who of us is not aware, as Pluto's moves through Capricorn, that the extremes between the have and have nots, the financial elites and the poor, have just gotten, I don't know how it can get any more extreme, although it definitely can, especially if they get their tax cuts passed through Congress here in the United States. I was looking for a little fact that I had want, but I'll just move on with that. So it all, though, boils down to the difference in a value system that either includes or excludes. And Jeffrey's term that he had coined was giving, sharing, and including versus taking, hoarding, and excluding. We will see this come to a head in all kinds of areas, with our healthcare, with, you know, the net neutrality, with the infrastructure, you know, with the social safety nets. I don't think there is an area of life that is not going to come to a head between who has it and who doesn't have it. For those of you who are not aware of this, there is going to be a revival of the Poor People's Campaign. This was a campaign that was started by Martin Luther King and ended up getting aborted when he was shot. And so they're going to have 40 days as a Poor People's Campaign. It's going to start Mother's Day 2018, and it's going to culminate June 23rd, 2018, right on the summer solstice, in which there's going to be 40 days of action and civil disobedience to stand up for the giving, sharing, and including. And again, a revival of the Poor People's Campaign. So choose how you're going to be active with it in your community, because this is some of that metamorphosing that's going to go on through Saturn's transit in Capricorn. We also know this archetype to be outer security in all its forms, okay? That outer security is that earth physical element. However, many of us here know that it is understood and reflected through inner security, the Cancer polarity to the Capricorn archetype. And as Saturn transits through Capricorn, and this outer form and that outer form, and as you know, things in our lives get disrupted, it throws us inward. It throws us to that Cancer polarity where we've got to deepen our inner security regardless of the chaos in our outer world. As we said earlier, Saturn in Capricorn is the boundaries of space and time, or linear time, along with its related mortality issues. We can expect the whole realm of Medicare for the elderly, nursing homes for the elderly. In other words, in natural law, society takes care of its elders. It reveres its elders. And in many of our westernized societies, we leave the elderly and the children to fend for themselves. So stay tuned to the issues that will come up in this regard and whether we make progress in this regard, Saturn through Capricorn, or it gets worse to explode even more as we move through the next decade, the beginning of the 2020s. Of course, the Saturn Capricorn 10th house archetype also relates to gender, hormonal, childhood, and parenting issues. In other words, our anima animus. And it's always about balancing our inner female and our inner male, regardless of whichever gender we happen to be in this life. When Saturn transits through Capricorn, we can find all of this stuff thrown topsy-turvy. It can, of course, there will be more and more LBGT issues. And for me personally, I really think that when you don't have an acceptance of reincarnation, it makes all the understanding and the psychology and the healing around these issues harder to do. You know, the EA example is always that, and this is especially in the consensus consciousness, that, you know, we reject it, we judge it, we want to flip over, you know, to the gender that we used to be without understanding that from a reincarnational perspective, you can wear out coming through one gender lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, and sooner or later it becomes an evolutionary necessity to flip genders. And the first time or two we do that, it's very uncomfortable. You have the masculine woman, you have the feminine man, you have them wanting to do their trans surgery stuff. You want them, you know, and so again, many of us on this class are going to understand that when we have an acceptance of reincarnation, it can take some of the pressure off, it can broaden the understanding, and it can also allow someone to be who they want to be, because the whole deepest understanding or lesson of the homosexuality is to love a soul first and a body second. So Saturn in Capricorn is going to throw this stuff into the air even more. The backlash of it in various countries that have homosexuality outlawed. In some other societies, we'll see the evolution of it and more, and you know, more and acceptance of that. Stay tuned. You know, the issue is just going to be all over the place. However, it is not going to go away. And within yourself, whatever gender you are, you want to say, how am I balancing the male and female within me? Do I speak up? Do I go into my masculine when I need to as a female? Can I, you know, acknowledge my feminine side as a male and acknowledge my emotions, etc.? You know, these issues are going to be all over the place for each of us on individual levels. And chances are, you know, most of us could find, you know, people in our lives going, I think I'm going to be gay. Or these young ones coming through, these Pluto Libras, are going, well, I'm bisexual. It's no big deal. I'll go this way. I'll go that way. I do both. Stay tuned. All over the place in where it's going to come out in its detailed way. Saturn in Capricorn is going to be an opportunity to really heal any of our childhood wounds. And this is most, you know, one of the helpful ways is again from reincarnation, the recognition that we choose the parents. Parents might have sex, but they don't get a choice in who comes through. We're the one who chooses to come through XYZ parents. So what is left from your own childhood that is wounded? How are you going to take self-responsibility for it? How are you going to mature and grow up and heal those wounds? If you have children, how are they coming through to you and saying, I'm wounded from your parenting? How are you helping to address that? What are the conversations that you are having around these familial conditionings on all sides? You with your parents, if they're still around, you with your children, if you have them. You know, this is a great opportunity to, again, mature and not carry the wound around anymore. Now, of course, from evolutionary astrology's perspective, the 10th house cusp will represent the authoritarian parent, but that may or may not be the male, it may be the female. And the 4th house cusp is always going to represent the nurturing parent. And in today's world, that may or may not be the mother. In other words, we're not Betty Crocker society where the woman stays home, like the Leave It to Beaver TV show, if any of you remember that, and mom stays home and cooks and cleans and makes meals while dad brings home the bacon. That, you know, was the Pluto and Cancer generation, and the Pluto and Leos brought about divorce and threw that all up into smithereens. And now your Pluto in Libras are trying to find some equity around all of the parenting and nurturing and who does what in regards to the roles. So Saturn in Capricorn will bring the potential to evolve all of that stuff as well. We also might see a backlash where it may become popular for the female to stay home with the children for those who can afford it. It won't be the way forward for the masses, because for most people it takes, in a two-person household, it usually takes both the male and the female to bring home enough resources for the family these days. Stay tuned. We'll see how all of this goes. In the midst of all this, with Saturn in Capricorn, we could also see some incest issues that will come to the surface around that, and somebody could have some major legal issues around it. Who knows how the details of it will come through. I put another chart in here for you, though. There's another one to look at here, and this is Kevin Spacey. And he just popped into my head because I thought, uh-oh, he's probably going to have some legal charges coming at him because he broke some laws of sexual impropriety with minors, or maybe with women. I don't know exactly how it's going to come down. So I looked up his chart, and I don't have a birth time, but July 26, 1959 in South Orange, New Jersey. When I don't have any idea of a birth chart, I'll use 12 noon. Okay, but I won't put the sun there. I use 0 Aries houses, because then I'm not playing games with the houses when I have no idea what they are. I just put it in the natural zodiac and go from there. Look at Kevin Spacey's chart. He has natal Saturn at 141 Capricorn retrograde. Natal Saturn at 2 degrees Capricorn. And the nodes are square Saturn. So Saturn squared the node, skip steps. He's going to have an interesting Saturn return for the second time, isn't he? It'll be interesting to see. Saturn's going to make one passage over his natal Saturn. The retrograde will bring it back within a couple of degrees when it goes stationary direct. I think Saturn goes retrograde at 9 and direct somewhere around 2 or 3 degrees. So he's only going to have one passage. Might be interesting to see what happens the month of January, and if there's any charges brought against him when he has a Saturn return, which will actually happen on January 3rd of 2018. I thought, oh, what an interesting example here. Saturn square the nodes is going to be to skip steps with everything we've been talking about here. And it can be skip steps with all his own hormonal issues. I had no idea Kevin Spacey was gay until it all came out in the news the end of October. And so the one actor, male actor, who, oh crap, just spilled my water. Okay, I grabbed it fast enough. I guess I need a lid on my water. The young actor who at the time was only 14 when he had unwanted overtures by Kevin Spacey. That's what this chart October 30th for Las Vegas is all about. Sorry, I've got to wipe up. Cancer wanted to be represented in my Saturn in Capricorn series. Spilled my water and I'm having to wipe it up before it gets any more of my papers wet. Oh, that's cute. So here we're looking at the Saturn in Capricorn natally, plus Saturn square the nodes. So the gay issues, the sexual the improper sexual advances, leads me to wonder what happened in his family of origin. Did he experience any of this stuff himself? I have no idea. If he didn't in this lifetime, it is quite possible that he has had prior life issues around this Capricorn power versus powerless, the control, you know, the almost, again, acting in some ways like Donald Trump did, because I have money, because I am someone who is very powerful in society. I don't have to follow the rules. I don't have to follow the laws. I can do what I want. And here is the fall from grace that is happening in the midst of this. Supposedly, he has entered some type of treatment facility. They won't publicly say what type. Hopefully, he will be making an effort to recognize the issue, to accept self-responsibility for it, and work to be healing that woundedness through Saturn in Capricorn, which of course is the opposite of Trump. Trump, I guess in the last week or so, was saying that that Hollywood access tape that we all heard right before the election was a fake. And the other actor who was on the bus with him said, no, it's not. There were a half a dozen of us on the bus. We all heard it. It's not a fake. So here you have perhaps in Kevin Spacey, someone who is working to make amends and take responsibility in his fall from grace versus our president who's in absolute denial of it. By the way, another tidbit, if you're not recognizing this in the skies right now, Jupiter is getting closer and closer to squaring the nodes of the moon in Leo Sag. If you look at, this was the end of October, so this was a month ago, okay? Jupiter is right here about, I think, 12 degrees or so in Capricorn, or in Scorpio. Here's the transiting nodes. Jupiter's going to square the nodes at Christmas. And so I don't think the sexual scandal thing is going to go away, as we've all recognized the Jupiter hit with that. Oh, I am seeing right now where he is going to have transiting Jupiter over natal Jupiter 3 times. Jupiter's going to go stationary retrograde at 23 Scorpio, right beyond his, in early March. We can maybe see him in the news with being charged or having, who knows what will go on from there. So just wanted to share that tidbit about Jupiter squaring the nodes this month with you. But looking at Kevin Spacey's chart, regardless of any issues with the law, he has had a tremendous fall from grace. And we'll stay tuned to see if he ever gets an acting job again. He's won an Oscar for Best Actor. He's won an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. Long storied history of Tonys and Emmys and Oscars. And I don't know if there'll be any more of that in his future again. So Saturn in Capricorn is also the principles of involution, compression, and depression. This is that passive polarity, energy returning back to the center. So whenever our outer reality or circumstances do not work anymore, when they no longer serves the soul, that outer reality can crumble, or sometimes it gets harder and harder to function in that reality. And we become, depressed. We become despondent. It is a natural cycle of turning us inward. And what it does is it forces us to reflect and to become aware of what's operating on an inner level, that Cancer polarity, and what needs to change inwardly to then reflect into changes outwardly. So sometimes we involute, we go inward, and we change something inwardly first, then it happens outwardly. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes you get the pink slip and you lose the job. And that forces a deep reflection of, what do I need to change within myself to rebirth my career, to find a new job, to come back out, stronger and better than ever? Can I self-love strongly enough that I don't lose a sense of myself when I don't have that position in that outer world anymore? So sometimes it starts outward, forces us inward, and sometimes we turn inward ourselves so that we can become aware of what to change inwardly to change it outwardly. All of that's going to be going on through Saturn in Capricorn in a variety of different ways for each of us on an individual level. I would say, if you want to, look at your own chart. What house cusp or two possibly does Saturn rule? Or excuse me, does Capricorn rule? Where is Capricorn? And so that house, where can you just go inward with it and reflect? How can you look at what you need to change in regards to that, inner world? If Capricorn rules the third house cusp, you're going to go inward and have a lot of inner conversations with yourself, have a lot of inner thinking with yourself. You're going to be changing your mind. You're going to be, wanting to look at crystallized mental patterns that need to be addressed and differentiated. If you have Capricorn on the 8th house cusp, then Saturn's transit through there is going to have you really turning inward in regards to your deep commitments in relationships. If you are in a marriage type commitment, you may look at having to address who's responsible for what in a relationship. How are we each going to be responsible for our own emotional wounding or betrayals or abandonment? How are we going to, have conversations around that? Does one partner always play the parent and the other person play the child? How do you shift those roles into two adults versus a parent-child? So wherever transiting Capricorn is in your chart, the Saturn transit is going to, again, ask you to go inward and reflect. Why do I act the way I do with this house area of my life? What do I want to change about it? And of course, that turning inward that comes with Saturn, most typically through some degree of depression. Figuratively, as we had said before, sometimes it starts outwardly and you got to go in because you need to change things, but it can also be literal. This can be the death of the body and the return of soul to spirit with Saturn in Capricorn. Who knows if we'll see, a wave of death in some regards, be it military and war and all of those control factors, be it some type of disease factor that the immune system may not be able to evolve fast enough with. Time will tell. Will it be nuclear war? Time will tell. Stay tuned. We don't know. There needs to be an inner acceptance of ourself, regardless of any outer roles we have in our life, and regardless of any of the circumstances in our life, whether you have a job or not, whether you have money or not, whether you have a relationship or not, whether you have children or not, whether you have this or that or not. This transit with its Cancer polarity is an opportunity for us to deepen emotional self-reliance, self-love, to create a deeper level of inner inner security that will then make us be secure outwardly, regardless of what's changing in our world. Chances are through the next 3 years, there isn't a one of us who is not going to have something about the reality of our life change. Perhaps for many of us, it could be the death of a parent or parents. Leroy and I both have our 4 parents yet. Leroy has a father who's had cancer for 9 years and is still with us. We're having to look at the ways in which both of us have more and more responsibilities with the aging of our parents. We're looking at the month of January at moving Leroy's parents from their house to an assisted living facility. Got his mom all stirred up. We told her last weekend, now you do realize Gemini, Sun in Gemini, she's got a bunch of planets in Gemini. You do realize, Gemini, that Mercury went retrograde this weekend in the opposite sign of your rulership, and it really would be helpful for you to breathe deep. And the nice thing was that his mom, heard it. She didn't joke at us. She could tell she was stirred up as a hornet's nest. And we says, well, you can make this Mercury retrograde worse, or you can try to breathe through it. So we sometimes work our way with those parental responsibilities. And how do we calm the parents down? How do we help the parents see the cup half full instead of empty? So in whatever ways will you have to work through those outer roles in your world? Capricorn distortions. One of the basics ones is when we have a tendency to settle for less or not make any a necessary effort to change something in our life. When we don't want to be self-responsible, when we don't want to have the discipline or the self-determination, oh, I'll be okay, I'll just stay in this nice, easy, secure job, you know, even though my boss overworks me and never appreciates it. In other words, many times what we can be doing is we're conforming to all the conditioning factors in our world at the expense of our own individuality, at the expense of the evolution of our soul. The Capricorn trying to Taurus, there can sometimes be that laziness or inertia that can come along with this. So Saturn in Capricorn is an opportunity to step up to the plate and make the effort here. We can have extremely rigid standards of right, wrong conduct. And, oh man, I mean, I'm just finding it amazing to watch the Senate race play out in Alabama and how people can put up with, you know, the abuse of minors for political gain, for their conservative, you know, ideals. And so it's okay to disregard the wrong conduct because the end justifies the means. I'm going to vote for him because never a Democrat, so to speak, or, you know, I need to vote for somebody who's anti-abortion and anti-homosexuality, which, you know, the Republican accused of sexual allegations is, you know, comes out with that in spades. He's a lawyer who has been a judge, and he's been removed from his judgeship twice for not obeying the law. One, because he refused to remove the 10 Commandments off of the courtyard grass, and two, because when the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage, he ordered the people, the workers in his county to ignore it. And so here he is running for Senate. It just boggles my mind that we can have these types of consensus distortions. And yes, this is the end of Saturn in Sagittarius. Stay tuned as to what Saturn in Capricorn is going to bring with these, you know, lack of discernment, lack of judgment, this ridiculousness that we can see going on in order to hold on to these, you know, Capricorn rigid standards. We can have the Capricorn types being overly controlling of others. There can be manipulation of others, including those who are less fortunate. Donald Trump is well known to be, you know, mean and rude and crude and tearing down people at the drop of a hat. You know, ordering them to do this, do that. Apparently, if he doesn't get his McDonald's meals served hot enough on the airplane when he travels, you know, woe be to the employee who had the misfortune of having to deliver it that day. we can see with the Jupiter in Scorpio, you know, the manipulation of others that have happened on those gender issues. I think as Saturn moves into Capricorn, it may intensify the Jupiter and Scorpio sexuality issues, and perhaps maybe it will bring about some changes. Who knows how many dollars you and I as US taxpayers have paid to settle sexual misconduct with our members of Congress, and they now have to go through, what do they call it, sexuality training or something like that, how to treat, you know, women with respect in Congress. And of course, we have that extremes between the social classes of the haves and the have-nots with the resources. The elites having more and more and more wealth. And this, of course, many times leads to abuses of power and authority. Those who have money think they get to be above the law. They get to do whatever they want to get to the goals of what they want. That famous "the end justifies the means," that is a Capricorn phrase. One of the movies that's going to be coming out here while Saturn is in Capricorn is, I want to say, I think it's called The Post. I didn't know this until I just happened to see a blurb on this, but apparently with the Nixon Watergate scandal, the two reporters who got all the attention for it, and I'm not going to remember their names, you guys might know them better. They did a movie on them called All the President's Men. What didn't get reported in this was that the publisher of the Washington Post was a woman, and they're going to do a movie on the story of her life. And Meryl Streep is going to play this female publisher of the Post, who was the one who made the ultimate decision to run the story that started the chain of events that brought about President Nixon's, he was the 10th house Pluto, that brought about his downfall, his impeachment, and his resignation. So as Capricorn transits through Capricorn, what are we going to do? We're going to revisit the whole Richard Nixon fall from grace. Won't that be some interesting timing here with all of the Donald Trump stuff that's going on? That's not a complete list of the distortions of Saturn and Capricorn. I just wanted to bring out some of the more or less obvious distortions. The Cancer polarity, a few words on that, because every time Saturn's going to have 3 retrograde cycles in Capricorn pointing towards that Cancer polarity. That information's next Wednesday's class. But anytime Saturn is retrograde, it's going to emphasize this Cancer polarity. And all the way through this more or less 3-year transit, this will be the objectivity we reach for in evolving these Capricorn themes and lessons. And of course, the biggest one of the Cancer polarity is replacing outer security with inner security. In other words, the emotional self-reliance lessons, where we take self-responsibility for any and all circumstances. And when we become emotionally self-reliant, that means I'm emotionally responsible for myself under any and all circumstances. Relationship, no relationship, job, no job, money, no money, etc. Emotional self-reliance means I can rely on myself to meet any and all of my emotional needs, even in the healthiest of marriages, etc. And so we're all going to be asked to deepen emotional self-reliance as Saturn moves through Capricorn. It will be emphasized during its retrograde cycles. And what this does to really broaden and deepen the inner security, it allows us to feel personally fulfilled, regardless of what is or is not out there in the world. Personal fulfillment not bound to a social position. Now, talk about the distortions of that. Everything about Donald Trump is bound up in how others see him. He has to be the best and the biggest and the worst, and you know that uh, bravado that has to come out of him. That that tells you that Saturn in Cancer in his chart, it does not have a deep emotional self-reliance. He's very emotionally immature under the surface, and that level of emotional immaturity then plays out into that outer world. So what will happen with this Cancer polarity is many times we'll receive emotional shocks that will force reality wake-up calls. In other words, something happens in that Capricorn outer world. The fall from grace, the obstruction of justice, charges that could be brought against Trump. The could come out that he was doing money laundering for the Russians. That's personally what I think is really going on with him, because Trump, for instance, bought some property in Florida, and 4 years later, 2 years later, just a few years later, sold it to the Russians for 4 times what he paid for it. That can be one of the easiest ways to launder money, is through real estate deals. So I think that he could have some money troubles come up, other than his Mar-a-Lago and the Trump Hotel in Washington, D.C. A lot of his hotels have been losing money. Golf courses that have been seeing downturns in golf revenues because of people being so turned off by him. So all of us on some personal level may have some emotional shock that has us looking at the reality of our world in a different way. The emotional shocks, the intent is to have us deeply examine what is internal security and how do we create it more and more. And of course, one of the most natural cycles with emotional shocks is to have the death of a parent. It's cold here today, and we've had an extremely warm November. And yesterday it was just absolutely beautiful outside. I made it outside for a few hours yesterday afternoon, and there was no wind, and we watched that moon come up, and we did a fire pit. We burned a lot of our excess pine cone and pine needles because it was just beautiful to be outside, and we wanted a full moon fire pit. Well, before dark, I've also been fall watering, and I was changing water, and this neighbor walked by, and they're new to the neighborhood from the last few years, and we just got to talking about gardening, and she wanted to know if our backyard was as big as our front yard, and it is. Nobody knows that we have this whole backyard that looks over this beautiful cliff, with big old canyon going a mile wide or something. And I invited her back there, and in the course of the conversation, she let me know that her husband died a month ago. And I remember it because the night of my birthday, when I turned 60, we were coming home that night, and we went by their street, and here were all of these ambulance cars, and we thought it was the neighbor. Turned out her husband had a heart attack and passed away, which I will remember that because it was the night I turned 60. Just to really, She's doing well. He has had heart surgery before. He's had heart attacks before. It runs in the family. She knew that each day was a gift of time, but it was real. It was close. It was like, oh my gosh, this is the neighbors. So many of our neighbors are couples, and many of them are retired. And so the emotional shock of that, of a death coming, you know, it's a natural rite of passage that we're all going to go through. Losing parents, some of us losing children, losing loved ones. You know, Pluto transiting through Capricorn, I've had to put my I've helped my 3 older kitties all transition to kitty heaven between 2014 to 2017. So that's one of the most dynamic emotional shocks we all go through, is that reality of space and time and death when it is literal. And so I gave her a big, big hug. I asked her, I said, would you accept a hug from me? And she was like, oh, please. And I don't know if you know this about me, but I'm not a quick hugger. I hug and I squeeze and I hold on, and I am like, let's connect. And I decided I was going to contact one of my neighbors and let her know. And I was going to see if I could get all of us local neighbors in our neighborhood to, you know, to just drop her a card, or perhaps take, you know, some food to her, to just let her know that we in the neighborhood are thinking of her. We are a pretty close-knit neighborhood, even if we are probably one of the few wild liberals in the neighborhood. The neighbors have all got to like us regardless of our politics. So another thing with the Cancer polarity is creating a self-image that is not dependent upon career or social position. And so when we, you know, this is moon, this is the emotions, this is that self-image that's just constantly there and evolving. You know, how well can you feel good about yourself? And when you can feel good about yourself, then again, it can lead to that personal fulfillment that we talked about before, based upon inner security, not bound up in a social position. And so, excuse me, sometimes we can have career blocks or removals to enforce these lessons. And when we can get to that positive self-image, we can be real inspiring and hopeful for others in doing it as well. The Cancer polarity will also be a cyclic reflection on the internal dynamics that determine the self-image, what our reality is, what our security is. Cancer is also that passive polarity with the water element, the emotions. So Cancer, Capricorn, both will have us from time to time, passive polarity, energy moving back to the center, moving inward. Capricorn, it tends to be the depression and despondency. Cancer, it is the emotions. Something triggers us emotionally and draws us inward to figure out the dynamics of why is this happening? What does this mean? And this will be periodically throughout this Saturn in Capricorn transit. It'll be emphasized when it's retrograde. And the whole point is to find that Capricorn courage to, again, change anything that's outworn or crystallized in the reality of our world. And then that Cancer polarity can take the self-determination from a positive self-image, and we can move forward in our world. We can move forward with our career. We can have that career rebirthing, or take that entrepreneurial leap, or just change and evolve reality in our world. Maybe it's simplifying reality. Maybe it's downsizing and not being so materialistic, or maybe it's buying that car or vehicle that you have always dreamed of buying. You know, I love SUVs, and I remember being young. I have a 10th house moon, and I'm a Capricorn rising. And I remember I was in my 20s, I think it was. I was single. I was newly divorced, and I remembered I had a coworker buy a SUV, and I said, "So how much are your car payments?" And I don't remember what the figure was, but I was just like, "Oh." And I had this instinctive thought, "Oh, I'll never be able to own an SUV." It might have been the depression of being divorced, but I'm now on my second or third SUV. So that ability to create in the material world with whatever is best for you, that can be one of the positives about Saturn in Capricorn. Is what is it that I have for goals and desires that I would like to create for myself, and to be able to make some good progress forward in those regards. For Leroy and me, every winter, it's to continue putting new windows in our house so we don't have the cold air coming in. Health and wellness. Here's the rulership. Saturn, Capricorn, 10th house. So again, it's all the same archetype. We can see issues with this stuff coming up. Saturn has rulership of the skin, the skeleton, the vertebrae, the spine, spinal discs, bones, knees, teeth, osteoporosis, arthritis. You know, will we see a wave of broken bones? Will we see medical breakthroughs with osteoporosis? Wouldn't it be nice if we could move closer towards universal health care in the US, and it includes dental care as well? I mean, I've told a Canadian, I was talking to a Canadian last week with my other work, my energetic balancing work, and we were talking about, I said, you know, they find us just an anomaly, whatever that word is, weirdos, that, you know, we don't have universal health care. And I says, well, do you know that you know, you have to get special health care to even cover your teeth, your eyes, and your ears? Do you know that our Medicare for our elderly does not cover their eyes, their ears, or their teeth? My mom has to pay for her hearing aids out of her own pocket. Both of my mothers pay for their dentures out of their own pocket. And this person just couldn't believe that our Medicare for the elderly didn't cover these things. So Saturn in Capricorn, will we see a decay of healthcare? It's going to continue to just be up in the air all over the case. I mean, I think we're going to get to it sooner or later, but the current tax bill is trying to take away the individual mandate, which will help collapse the Obamacare from within. They're going to try and kill it off, you know, any way they can. So Jupiter rules growth, and Saturn rules decay, including death. Saturn also has rulership of the B and T cells from the bone marrow, which, if I'm understanding it correctly, go on to create some of our immune system cells, which is why with Saturn in Capricorn, could we see some type of disease epidemic, again, that the immune system is not evolving fast enough to be able to take care of it. I mean, it could be something as simple as a flu epidemic. It could be something else as well. Along with Jupiter, Saturn has co-rulership of the pituitary gland, the thyroid, and the prostate. And as I am going through this, I'm going, oh, isn't it interesting? For those of you who don't know that, we got health care for Leroy after the election went the way it did. Went out and got that Obamacare before there wasn't any. And Leroy's had prostate surgery quite successfully, and he had a spinal disc removed quite successfully. And all of this, isn't that interesting, Leroy? You've had these Saturn surgeries. Oh, and he also had some little skin things removed from all over his body. So all three of your surgeries was in the area of
Saturn.
the Saturn stuff. And that was where I mean, you have Saturn in Scorpio, so you're a couple of years behind your Saturn return.
Saturn is going through my 6th house of health and wellness.
There you go. There you go. Transiting Saturn through the 6th. So there we go. So Saturn also has rulership of any issues with crystallization in the body, frozen, you know, if something freezes or gets paralyzed in the body. Of course, Saturn rules depression in general. It rules exhaustion. It has specific rulership of the minerals calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. And in the chakras, Saturn is the outer layer of the root chakra, the first chakra. Saturn has rulership of that, and therefore then the anus, hemorrhoids, feces. You know, one of the biggest issues with a lot of our westernized diets is constipation. Saturn has rulership of that. Constipation is a crystallized colon, so to speak, a plugged up colon. So we could see emphasis or issues around any of these areas as Saturn transits through its own sign of Capricorn. You also, with the efforts of, you know, emotional self-reliance, self-responsibility, self-determination, inner leading to outer, you could see improvements in those areas. You could see these areas actually bring about growth and evolution in a more positive way, strengthening the bones that could be weak from osteoporosis. Breakthroughs in healthcare in all of those ways. One of the other things that's just popping into my mind is 3 of our 4 parents are Pluto in Cancers. And Leroy's father is the oldest, and I'm trying to remember when if you know, he's having Pluto in Capricorn oppose his natal Pluto in Cancer, and I thought that might bring his crossover, but it didn't. And hold on a second. I am quickly looking up his birth chart.
Well, it's 1930. Yep.
Yeah, your dad has natal Pluto at 18 degrees Cancer retrograde. He's having his Pluto opposition 3 times. Very rarely do we see a transiting Pluto oppose natal Pluto because of 248-year cycle. However, the Pluto Cancers, as it then moves into Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, it moves the fastest through Scorpio, only 10 years. And so it moves through those planets so easily. The Pluto in Cancer generation can actually see Pluto in Capricorn opposing natal Pluto in Cancer. His dad's born in 1930, so those who were born in the late 20s and now moving through the 30s, many of the Pluto in Cancers, they're going to see Saturn in Capricorn opposing that natal Pluto. So there could be health issues in these ways that might come up for these natal Pluto and Cancer souls. Saturn opposes that natal Pluto. Here is the Saturn in Capricorn ingress. I just wanted to point this out to you. Many astrologers like to do a chart for it. I actually did mine for Rapid City instead of Washington, D.C. Again, I use those 0-degree Aries. Here's the biggest thing in the ingress chart. Saturn goes into Capricorn December 19th, right before the winter solstice, which is December 21st. And a couple of hours after the sun moves into Capricorn, we have the Sun-Saturn conjunction, their annual conjunction at 0 degrees Capricorn. So again, Saturn ingress, sun is right here, 2 days away, but we still have that orb of the grand trine and fire signs in this ingress chart. Here is that Jupiter square to the nodes that I talked to you about. That's going to be exact, I think, December 23rd, 24th. So these two themes can follow through Saturn's 3 years in Capricorn. Saturn's going to give us reality checks, most likely Jupiter and Scorpio square the nodes to all the sexuality scandals and how it's affecting the big gender issues between, you know, equal pay for men and women, equal rights for men and women. This grand cross in fire signs, Mercury pulls it into orb with the North Node. Pardon?
Grand trine.
Well, I'm starting. Yeah, grand trine. Mercury pulls it into orb with the North Node. Venus and the Sun pull it into orb with Uranus. So it's a wide grand trine informing all those planets. Again, if you followed me over the years, I don't always look at grand trines as being nice and sweet and easy. Lots of times they're lazy. And when you look at these grand trines in the fire signs and you look at all the lies that have been told and the fake news, that stuff is being pulled into Saturn through Capricorn with this ingress chart. We also have this moon new phase Pluto in Capricorn. So who's going to accept the responsibility, who's going to have the emotional maturity and grow up, or who's going to be in emotional denial and control? Stay tuned, time will tell. We'll get to move through it over the next 3 years. So this is it for my material for tonight. I just wanted to give a little more in depth into these archetypes. So Saturn, here is its transit through Capricorn dates again for any of you. If there are any questions or comments from anybody on the board, if there's anything I haven't covered, if you think of, you're welcome to ask right now. Or you can also just send us an email and I'll see if I can include it in our second class, which is going to be Wednesday. However, I'm going to leave you with these questions for Saturn's transit through Capricorn. What are my deepest fears and how do I address them? How do I unconditionally love myself? How do I balance my inner male and female? Where do I need to accept self-responsibility for the circumstances in my life? How are my familial relationships evolving? What are my emerging career goals and desires? What changes do I need to make around resources? All right, little slideshow because I'm going to do my annual forecast January 3rd this year. I think that's a Wednesday. And of course, as I said, Wednesday's class, Saturn and Capricorn through the cycles. We're going to look at that Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto transit in Capricorn, along with the nodal axis in Cancer, Capricorn, along with the planetary nodes of Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Cancer, Capricorn as well. So we'll get a little more, perhaps some collective forecasting as well through these Saturn cycles. Again, questions, comments from anybody?
You're clear on the board, Kim.
All right. Well, then, thank you, everyone. Leroy will have this PDF available for you probably tomorrow. He's been pretty fast and sharp on that stuff. And so thank you, and I will see you in a couple of nights.
Yeah, be certain to look for that follow-up email from the GoToWebinar service. That's where the link to the PDF will reside. Just copy and paste it right out of that follow-up email and put it into a new browser window, and you can download the PDF there with all the media links. And enjoy the slides that Kim created, and we'll see you Wednesday night.